Come on.
He's had 5 2-pounders. Everything else is 3 pounds and above.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. Thanks for tuning in. I'm out on the water fishing the river here, and we've got tons and tons of wood that's on the shoreline. And a lot of times there's fish that are hiding behind those limbs or around the logs. And one of the questions I get asked all the time by you guys out there is, how do you skip a bait back into that? You try to skip with a bait caster and you end up getting a bad bird's nest, and it's just a bad scenario. Well, the first thing I got to tell you guys is it takes a lot of practice, right? You can't just fire up into a spot thinking you're going to do it for the first time if you've never done it. But having said that, you got to have the mindset that you're going to put your bait to where you think it needs to go. So what I mean by that is, if you pull up and you're all nervous that you're not going to put that bait way up under a branch, you're probably not going to do it. You're probably going to end up hitting the branch. From my experience, the best thing you can do is have the confidence to fire the bait back there. Don't even think about it. You see the spot, you go, it looks good, and you fire it in there. That's when you're going to get the bait in there. If you sit there and think about it, you're probably not going to get the bait all the way back into where you want it to go. But it's really critical to get into those areas, because that's where the fish are a lot of times. It's just one of those things, whether you're fishing docks or you're fishing boat slips, with pontoons and big boats, or you're fishing a river like this with all kinds of big log jams, or, whatever it is. A lot of times, with the way that our fisheries are pressured right now, getting into those areas that not many other people get to are going to lead to a lot more bites for you. It just is that simple. I mean, the places that I fish a lot of times are so pressured that those areas that are much harder than the average fisherman can get to are going to lead to more fish catches. So I'm going to walk you through the steps as to how I do it. Hopefully it will help you guys have the confidence to go out and try it. It's not one of those things that you can just go and sit at home and flip into a coffee cup. You have to be out on the water practicing your skipping. Like, there's no other way that I know of that will help you with it. But let's see what we can do and see if we can help you out. So the first thing you need is a good bait to skip. You don't want to start with a bait that's got a ton of big appendages. I like to skip a swim jig. This is a Dirty Jigs regular size swim jig with a 3.5-inch Berkley The Deal on it. It's a nice, bulky, heavy bait, and it's one that skips well, and it's weedless, so when I fire it in there, I'm gonna be able to get my bait back. You don't wanna start trying to skip a crankbait or skip a spinnerbait. It's really difficult to do. Even for the pros out there, it's not a simple thing to do. So I recommend starting with a jig, a Texas rig, or like a swim jig, preferably a swim jig or a jig, because you don't have the plastic bait potentially sliding down your hook. From a rod and reel standpoint, it's easier to skip a shorter rod. I think if you're starting out, you should probably be skipping with like a 6.5 to 7 footer. But once you get better, you can go with bigger rods, but it's harder to skip with an 8-footer than it is, say, this 7.3 that I've got in my hand right here. This is a medium heavy 7.3 fast action. You want a faster action rod because when you fire it in there, you have better control with a faster rod than you would a moderate speed rod. From a reel standpoint, you want a reel that's got a good braking system and one that's just a good quality reel with a good spool on it. This is a Abu Garcia Revo ALF. It's just a good quality reel. Now what you want to do in terms of setting it is you'd set it like you would normally any other bait, but you got to recognize that if you're going to skip your bait back into an area that's tough, you're gonna have the spool looser than you normally would. So if you're just starting out with a bait caster, I would say you engage the reel, and when you take your thumb off, it shouldn't fall to the water. I've got my reel in pretty much a free spool mode, which is going to allow me to get further distance. You may want to start with your brakes tightened down more, just if you're beginning and you're really concerned about getting backlashes. I do recommend, if you've got a magnetic brake or you know, some sort of secondary brake, this helps with the second part of that cast. So when the bait starts slowing down, that's when the magnetic brakes will kick in, and I've got them turned on right now a little bit. You know, they're not, this is max, this is max, this is minimum. I've got about a quarter of the way on. That's just to help with a little bit of a slow. But you have to recognize that when you go to skip, you're talking about controlling the spool with your thumb. So that's kind of the setup that you need. Now we've got a really nice log jam here. I want to skip way back. There's probably 25 feet that I can go under that first laydown right there. The key to skipping is when you come back, when you bring your rod back, you want to keep the rod tip at a low level, closer to the water, and you want to release that bait when you're close to the water. So when I swing this rod, I'm probably 1.5 feet above the water. So I'm doing this motion similar to how I would skip a rock. When you skip rocks, you try to do it sidearm. In this case, I'm gonna do the same sidearm motion with my rod. But what you'd have to do is accelerate. When you come back all the way, you really want to accelerate through that first portion. So in this case, you accelerate and you fire it back in there, okay? If you're too timid and you don't have the fast acceleration in that first part, the bait's not going to have the power to go skipping across the water. It's going to pull off to one side. So, you know, you want a decent amount of line. I got probably, you know, 1.5 feet of line between my rod tip and the bait. You pull back and we're going to accelerate. And as soon as you hit that peak acceleration and your rod tip is about right where you want it, that's when you're going to release. So you just, I mean, you got to go for it, guys. That's really what it comes down to. Let me work it out of there. That looks too good. It'd be great to catch a fish. So that's the key. Accelerate into that first part, and then as soon as you release, you're gonna make sure your thumb is on the spool, letting the spool go, but as soon as you feel like you need to stop that bait, you stop it. I mean, it's not difficult, guys, but it is something you need to practice. So I'd recommend finding a tree like this, or just getting out on the water. You don't have to have a tree. You can get out on the water and just fire it that way and skip. You know, it's just the motion. You got to get the motion down. And you'll see when I'm releasing, I'm down here. The other thing I want to point out is after you release, bring your rod tip up. Because when you bring your rod tip up, what you're doing is you're pulling your line up with the bait, and it's wanting to try to rise the bait. And that's going to allow the bait to skip. If I keep my rod tip down, at that point, you're going to get what I just got, a backlash, and it's not going to go well. The bait may skip as it did in that case, but it's not skipping nearly as far as I want it to. So that's how you do it, guys. I hope that was helpful. Things to remember: a good bait to skip, something small, something compact with a little bit of weight and some size to it so it skips. Start with a shorter rod, have a decent bait casting reel, accelerate into the cast. After you let go, make sure your thumb is riding the spool, and at the same time bring your rod tip up. It's really that simple, and you can get it down like that, guys. That bait skipped 30 feet. So I hope that was helpful. If it was, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, stay tuned, more tips coming out tomorrow.